research ethics on your right shoulder. And when you say that, it's sort of, what's she talking about? But then during the course they understand that research ethics is very much, it goes hand in hand with rigorous research. So you can't do research, good research, without it being ethical. So ethics then now is a field of study. You study that in philosophy, it is very much a field of study pertaining to what is considered right or wrong in a certain setting or certain society. And it involves these values that have been created by or produced and reproduced in communities and societies. So because there is a cultural and social context within which these values appear, we can then conclude that values are not universal all across the world. They are culture bound and they may change over time. These are two important things that are necessary for what I'm going to talk about in a while. So then this field of study has historical roots in philosophy ever since Aristotle, for example. So it's not something just two decades old. These schools of thought have arisen. So you would, and I'm not going to go into details of that, and that would have been great if our colleague from Birzeit was here. But there are tons of material on that. But what I'm saying is that there are schools of thought about what is ethical and how people should go about behaving ethically, how they should go about behaving ethically, whether in societies or whether now for us in research. So there is, for example, a focus on the collective good. Whatever produces good for a society or for a group, then that is ethical. Another school of thought says, well, wait a minute, collective good is not the only thing. What about duties to other human beings? Forget about the result. We're interested in the process. So what about research ethics? Research ethics is the ethics pertaining to research, right? And this concept is very much rooted in and has come up from the global north or the west, as Setani rightfully pointed to. It's a modern notion, okay, that emerged because of research that has abused individuals and groups in the West in the 20th century, particularly around World War II era, okay? Specifically in the fields of medical research and psychology. So, for example, there have been the atrocities of the Nazi experiments on the prisoners of war. There has also been psychological experiments that deceived participants. There was an interesting study that we talk about all the time. It's called the Tuskegee study that tries to understand the natural progression of syphilis. And this was a study conducted in a place called Tuskegee with African Americans in the 1970s, where this group was deprived of the medicine or any kinds of treatment because they wanted to see the natural progression. So that is a lot of harm. And so because of these, and there are a couple more, but these are the main ones, so these led to different kinds of codes of conduct and regulations because research with human beings or on human beings are producing a lot of harm. So these, for example, the prominent one that is very much, that has become sort of universal around the world is the Belmont Report, which came out from the World Medical Association in the 1960s. There was a meeting and they came out with sort of like a declaration. The Belmont Report, which then was followed by a series of ideas to establish similar guidelines and codes of conduct in different disciplines. So you have the codes of conduct in anthropology, codes of conduct in psychology, then in public health, in nursing, and so on and so forth. However, these principles that came out from the Belmont report, and these are three major ones, I'll talk quickly about them in a moment, have been the ones that have been adopted by the federal government in the US and many other governments in the West. And they have become the universals. So it is assumed that whatever applies in the West in the context of biomedical research can and should be applied or should be used to guide research with other people around the world in biomedical and non-biomedical research. That's a great assumption. I mean, it doesn't work that way, of course. This is my nota bene, but... So then, because these have been adopted by the federal government, and for AUB, because we're an American University of Beirut, and we have the main office in New York, we need to abide by the federal government regulations when we do our research. That's the big challenge, okay? This adoption of these guidelines have given rise to the necessity to have what you call research ethics committees. And this term is used in Europe and in the UK, equivalent to institutional review boards in American institutions or America. So these are the same thing. And of course you have the Human Research Protections Office. Ooh, that's a big thing in the US. جربنا نرجع نحطه على الواطن فطسنا بركي إذا نطفيه بالمرة ما عندي مشكلة لأنه الطقس جيد برا. So then all of these codes of conduct and rush towards establishing guidelines for different disciplines or whatever, the only idea, the main aim was to protect people from research harm. But the whole idea stemmed from protecting research from physical harm. And that's where it came from, yani the biomedical studies. Okay. So what are the principles? To remember them, I'd say these are ABC. So ABCs. When I talk to my students, the ABCs of the Belmont report. And this has been seen to be called principalism. So when you abide by or use these three principles to guide your research, you are using the framework of principalism. Not a problem there, but let me tell you what these are. First of all, it's the idea of respect for individual autonomy. So that's the A. Respect for individual autonomy. Because people are seen as autonomous individuals, free-floating in the air, have no connections to other people, decide on themselves, have no undue influences, whether from their community or from the country they live in or from their family. And this probably applies in the West because the West is very much an individualist society. Number two, so that means people are given a chance to voluntarily consent to be part of studies, and then confidentiality and privacy are very important things that one needs to think about, and that one can achieve confidentiality and privacy throughout the research. The second principle is a principle of do no harm, beneficence. That's the B. Do no harm, or do as little harm as possible, but improve the chances of doing good to the participants of the study. The third is equitable distribution of burdens, social justice. So this is, in my mind, social justice. So sort of like give back. So if someone's involved in a medical trial, the important thing is that there is not just one group who receives who's in the trial, not to be overstudied. So there needs to be this distribution of burden to other groups and other individuals. Just a quick description of what these principles are. These are good and applicable in medical research. And even if they're applied in medical research, they're looked at as something that needs to be done at the very beginning, like through a consent form. It doesn't mean that if you get people's consent and if you choose your population diligently, then throughout the research project, there is no guarantee that harm will be done or people will forget, and so they need to be reconsented. So the study that I'm doing with participants involved in medical studies, the participants themselves, they tell you they consented us, but I can't remember what it was. So every time they come in and they do further studies on me, because I'm here for long term, I'm taking my medication for 10 years, because I have multiple sclerosis. Since they're, treating me, I'll do anything because they're giving me, the medication and I'm feeling better. Oof, that's right, biomedical research, right? So that means there is undue influence. Consent is not voluntary. So, okay, now take that a little bit away from biomedical research. What's happening in the world is that universities around the world and in our parts of the world, they are aspiring to and are using and adopting, not adapting, adopting as is, these principles in their universities and in their institutional review boards, because there are vested interests between these universities and the West. So in terms of funding or in terms of requirements for exchange programs, etc. So there are major funding agencies in the West that fund medical and social science research. So, for example, the U.S. National Institutes of Health. If you get a fund from that, means you are top in your field. It's very competitive, and they require that you have an online certification of the NIH training. So even if you pass that, does that mean you are able to do research ethically? In my mind, no, because I've gone through it and it doesn't. And other funders such as United States Agency for International Development, IDRC is another one, the Wellcome Trust, etc. All of these require that you go through some sort of ethical regulation in your institution, okay, or at least have a phrase about how you're going to ensure ethical conduct in your research. So what's the most available? What's the easiest? The three principlism, and you can see those not always available, but when they are available. We did an analysis of websites in 4 countries of the Arab region that house major research institutes. So Lebanon, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. There were 126 websites, but 64 were those related to human subjects research. 60 were readily accessible, and only 20 had anything related to ethics and research ethics and principles. The principles that were mentioned, where they were mentioned, were these: the Belmont Report, the World Federation, etc. Nothing local. So that's a finding in itself. Right. So I think I'll just say one more word about the problem with these principles, and then later on I'll leave some challenges. I'll leave the challenges quickly that I found when I was doing research with researchers from different disciplines. We now know that the principles that we're talking about that have become universals are rooted in the West, are rooted in medical research, and stem from individualistic societies. We are not individualist societies, so just having that in mind. So we are a collectivist society, we're a community, There are networks, and people usually don't make decisions by themselves about many things, even buying a car. So how about involvement in research? Oh, I need to think about what the repercussions are on my family. Shall I ask my husband? Shall I ask my friend? And some of the participants that I'm seeing in this study that we're doing were signed up to the study by a family member. So where's consent in all of that? So another thing is that these principles follow the biomedical model of ethics, which really are very challenging if you want to put a round peg in a square hole or vice versa, are very difficult for social science research because of the nature of these disciplines. So social science is quite different from biomedical research and medical research. They stem from two different principles and ideas about how the world is seen and how we produce knowledge. So when we talk about research ethics, ethical research, it means whatever you want to call it, but for me it means socially responsible conduct. Responsible conduct, okay? Not just at the beginning of the project where you get a consent, because it doesn't guarantee you are an ethical researcher. La samhallah. The idea of socially responsible means you, as a researcher, being responsible to your participants, to their culture, to the discipline, all throughout the research, as Satania was saying, from the research question to access to field work to analysis and to dissemination. And there's a lot about that in the field of public health, because we deal with communities and individuals that belong to collectivist society. So I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, جهاد. قبل ما أفتح النقاش الجلسة للنقاش، طلبت من منيرة إنه تقدم فكرة كتير سريعة وبسيطة عن الأدوات مثل ما عم نسميها اللي إحنا عم نفكر نطورها بالمجلس لمحاولة التعامل مع أخلاقيات البحث بطريقة ملائمة لظروفنا مثل ما ذكرت جهاد، يعني لجعل عملية التفكير وتطبيق أخلاقيات البحث مش عملية فوقية، مش مسألة موافقات، مسألة إدماج فكرة الأخلاقيات بالبحث نفسه. فعم نفكر بطرق مختلفة. منيرة راح تذكر 2 أو 3 منهم. هدول لساتهم لساتنا في طور التفكير، لسه ما طبقنا أي شيء من هذا، فكمان بنحب نسمع آرائكم في هاي المسألة. بس قبل ما أنتقل هناك بحب جهاد at some point تحكي لنا كمان عن فكرة ال vulnerable populations، المجتمعات أو المجموعات غير المحصنة، أظن بترجموها باللغة العربية، لأنه أظن هاي إلى يعني مهم كتير بالنسبة لنقاشنا اليوم. والنقطة الثانية اللي بنحب إنه نناقشها إنه ممكن مثل ما لازم نسأل نفسنا إنه هل الفرد المبحوث هو فرد مستقل وبأخذ قرارات لوحده إلى آخره، نسأل إنه الباحث، هل الباحث كمان مستقل وعم بيقدر إنه يتصرف مثل ما بده؟ ففي عنا كمان ناحية هون أظن بكل المجتمعات، خاصة مجتمعاتنا، إنه كيف بنحمي الباحث، مش بس كيف نحمي المبحوث. نحمي الباحث من المبحوث في بعض الأحيان، كم نحمي الباحث من السلطات ومن القوة الموجودة أو من أثر البحث. ففي intersections، في تداخل هون بين أخلاقيات البحث وحقوق الإنسان من ناحية معينة لما نفكر بالمبحوث، وفي تداخل بين أخلاقيات البحث والحرية الأكاديمية لما نفكر بالباحث. ففي أكثر من فريمورك أو من إطار اللي لازم نفكر فيه بأخلاقيات البحث. يعني في هاي التداخلات مع أطر ثانية. فمنيرة quickly. Yeah, no, we are running out of time. I don't know how that happened.
Okay. We started late.
We started late. Yeah.
أنا كمان هحكي بالإنجليزي وهطول. So we came up with a few ideas coming out of this workshop that we had with a number of people in December, that were thinking through research ethics and how we can encourage this culture without imposing bureaucratic nightmares on researchers and so on. So the few ideas that we came up with is one, starting an online platform where people could share, so instead of assuming that we know the questions that are being asked and the particularities of each time and place and so on, and how these common sense terms are being applied in different places, we would instead ask people to kind of contribute to this blog, or a SoundCloud was an idea, or through video, through text, and talk about the particularities of their research studies, and then, kind of crowdsource advice or different considerations, ethical considerations that they should be taking into account when they're doing their research. And so that would be the first thing. So instead of assuming we know the questions, we're asking people to contribute case studies. The second thing that we would be doing, and maybe building out of this blog or this forum, is creating an online tutorial, which we wouldn't import, but instead we'd be using case studies that are specific here. So for instance, on one of the models that we are looking at, maybe because we're being funded by IDRC, is their Tri-Council Policy Statement tutorial, which asks, which goes through the different research principles